The future of the US dollar as the world's major reserve currency is in serious jeopardy, and now even America's strongest allies are starting to voice their frustration. Joseph Borrell, the EU's High Representative for Foreign Affairs, recently stated, "Everyone has to follow the US dollar, because otherwise their currency will be devalued. Everybody is running to increase interest rates, which will bring us to a world recession." The future of our world economy looks bleak, and as Europe continues to deal with the Ukraine war and the US government continues its conflict with China, something must change. The change is well underway, and ironically, it involves one of America's biggest allies, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, who now wants to shift its allegiance from the United States and build ties with China, Russia, and India, three of the largest oil-consuming nations in the world. The US government will do everything it can to preserve dollar hegemony, but Saudi Arabia will change the future of our global financial system when they formally join the BRICS alliance with China, a country whom they've stated will be the national priority for the next 50 years. Everyone, today's video is proudly sponsored by Ren, a new website that helps you calculate your carbon footprint and find incredible projects to fund to help offset your carbon footprint and make a difference in the world today. This company is truly changing the world, and I'm so honored to partner with them. Please watch to the end of today's video for a full breakdown of their incredible mission. Now, to understand how significant this move from Saudi Arabia will be, we must first learn a history lesson. In 1971, US President Richard Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard to print more dollars to fund America's war in Vietnam. The switch to a fiat currency was an absolute disaster and wreaked havoc on the American economy. The US dollar dove in value, oil prices began to skyrocket, and the US needed a plan to save its currency. Enter Saudi Arabia. In arguably the most lucrative business deal ever brokered in world history, the US convinced Saudi Arabia to sell oil exclusively in US dollars. In exchange, the US military would give Saudi Arabia military protection and make Saudi Arabia the most powerful nation in the Middle East. Saudi's biggest rival is Iran, and the US would help cripple Iran's economy by imposing sanctions that still exist to this day. What a win-win for both Saudi and the United States. And this was the birth of the petrodollar and how the US government was able to save its currency and prolong the American century. That is until China started making a major move in the world order. Perhaps the best illustration on how much the world has changed and how China has shaped that change is this graph here. At the turn of the century, only a handful of countries counted China as their top trading partner. The majority of the world depended on the US. But fast forward 20 years, and now the majority of the world relies on China as their top trading partner. Of course, the creation of China's Belt and Road Initiative has been a major catalyst for this change, with roughly 60% of the world's population now living in a country that is part of the Belt and Road Initiative. And as China's GDP continued to grow every year, so did China's need for oil and its own relationship with Saudi Arabia. Earlier this year, Saudi Arabia sent shockwaves around global markets when it announced that it was considering selling oil in Chinese renminbi. And when Saudi Arabia formally joins BRICS, it will guarantee that Saudi Arabia will break its deal with the US and begin trading oil in other currencies, or simply use the proposed basket of BRICS currencies that will once again be backed by the gold standard. Saudi Aramco CEO stated last year that ensuring the continuing security of China's energy needs remains our highest priority, not just for the next 5 years, but for the next 50 years and beyond. Those are hard words for the US government to hear, and America was dealt another difficult blow when Saudi Arabia announced it was cutting oil production by 2 million barrels a day. Analysts speculated Saudi Arabia made this move to spite the US and purposely cause inflation to rise directly before Biden headed into the important US midterm elections. Biden responded by threatening Saudi Arabia with unspecified consequences and even proposing passing the No-PEC bill, which would restrict Saudi Arabia from purchasing US weapons. While the US can appear tough on paper and try to threaten Saudi with unprecedented consequences, the reality is that the US needs Saudi much more than Saudi needs the US. Proof of that was seen last week when the Biden administration granted immunity for the Saudi prince over his role in the killing of an American journalist in October 2018. Biden's gift of immunity for the Saudi prince has been called an act of weakness and political cowardice, and it opens the door for Saudi to begin working with other nations. The US knows its relationship with Saudi is most likely not going to improve, and therefore has already implemented a new strategy to save the US dollar. Just last week, the US government miraculously lifted an oil embargo on Venezuela and granted oil company Chevron a license to pump oil in the country. The agreement stipulates using $2.7 billion that were previously frozen due to US sanctions towards economic development, while requiring Chevron to exclusively export all oil from this new deal back to the United States. But the situation in Venezuela is actually very important to understand because it reveals one of the major problems with the US dollar. Many countries are too vulnerable to US sanctions and live under control of the US government, who can simply open and close trade whenever it suits US interests. This is why a move towards BRICS looks so enticing for Saudi Arabia and many other nations. Argentina has formally approached China to join BRICS, along with Iran, Turkey, Egypt, and 11 other different developing countries around the world. Participation in BRICS now signals a new world that is emerging beyond established Western dominance. BRICS currently represents 41% of the world's population and has a combined GDP of $24.4 trillion. And when the remaining countries officially join BRICS, over half the world's population will be part of the alliance. By using unnecessary sanctions and weaponizing the US dollar, the United States has contributed largely to a more fragmented global financial system. Even back in 1971, John Connolly, President Nixon's Treasury Secretary, bluntly told a group of European finance ministers, "The dollar is our currency, but it's your problem." This comment is as valid today as it was then, and public opinion about America and the US dollar are shifting, even among European countries. This article from Political states top European officials are furious with the Biden administration and now accuse the Americans of making a fortune from the Ukraine war. While Europe settles in for a long and hard winter ahead, maybe they can distract themselves by watching their countries play at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. But this video isn't about football, and despite China not qualifying for the event, it just might walk away as the big winners in Qatar, as just last week, China signed a new 27-year deal with Qatar Energy to supply China's Sinopec with liquefied natural gas, and the longest such agreement to date. It's a huge step forward for China, who now has secured the one resource every country needs to develop their economy, and that is energy. Within 3 years, all the BRICS nations will have central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and can trade bilaterally without the need of the United States dollar. Saudi Arabia can supply the BRICS network with crude oil, while China has locked in natural gas with Qatar. China is securing their energy needs for the next 3 decades, while Europe is still scrambling to obtain their energy needs for the upcoming winter. Again, the world is changing, and let me share with you my final thoughts. With the world de-dollarizing and countries looking for ways to trade in alternate currencies, alliances like the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are only going to gain in popularity in the future. The US is going to respond by becoming more aggressive towards China, and certainly Saudi Arabia when it formally joins the BRICS alliance. But the real question here is, can the US, China, and Saudi Arabia learn to coexist in this ever-changing and complex geopolitical world that we now live in? Well, I'm a firm believer that the future of mankind depends on it, and many of you who follow this channel know that I have a passion for the US and China, and firmly believe that for the world to win, both nations must put aside their differences and come together. Climate change is one of our planet's biggest threats, and while the US and China learn to work together, there is another option you can take to help reduce your carbon footprint, and today's video sponsor, Ren, is going to help. Ren is a website where you simply answer a few questions about your lifestyle, and they'll calculate your carbon footprint. No one can reduce their carbon footprint to zero, but we can contribute to some incredible projects around the world to offset our carbon footprint. China is the world's leader in renewable energy, and the government is planting 36,000 square kilometers of new forest every year. That's more than the total area of Belgium. And Ren is funding similar tree planting projects like this initiative in East Africa that empowers local farmers and promotes over 50% of women into leadership positions. Ren is encouraging people to do 3 things: live sustainably, crowdfund climate solutions, and encourage politicians to make climate change a priority. By signing up and contributing to tree planting and rainforest protection projects on Ren, you'll play an active role in making the planet more sustainable for future generations. Thank you to Ren for partnering with me on today's important video, and simply click on the link in my description to get started. As a bonus, the first 100 people who sign up today will have 10 extra trees planted in their name. Once again, I want to say thank you so much to Ren for sponsoring today's important message. Make sure you take advantage of this amazing opportunity. Be one of those first 100 people to claim those free trees and start helping our environment for future generations. Everyone, my name is Cyrus. Thanks for spending time with me here on YouTube, and I look forward to seeing you all in next week's episode.